It is the first mild day of March, each minute sweeter than before. The redbreast sings from the tall larch that stands beside our door. Welcome to another episode of the Troubadour Podcast, and this is Sunday Morning Poetry. Now, just so you know, we have Sunday Morning Poetry. We have Ballad Wednesdays. That's audio only. So you have to go to troubadourmag.com and subscribe to the podcast. It's on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, wherever you listen to podcasts, I'm on it. And if I'm not, let me know and I'll try and get on it. And with these, Ballad Wednesdays, we read a traditional, modern, or an intellectual, or some form of a ballad. And I focus just on the, just the ballad form, essentially. Now, sometimes in this Sunday Morning Poetry, I also have some ballads, but I try to be a little bit more in the traditional sense with Ballad Wednesdays, where I'm going more into like the 13, 14, 1500s and reading some of the ballads there. And I try to help with the language to make it a little easier for you. Today, we're going to be reading the poem Lines, written at a small distance from my house and sent by my little boy to the person to whom they are addressed. That is the actual title. It's by William Wordsworth in his book, With Coleridge, Lyrical Ballads, that we've been going over. Now, this is the longest title, and the little boy sent by my little boy is not his actual son, but it is the son of a friend of his who was who had needed to offset the child for a little while he did other things, and gave a little stipend to Wordsworth, because Wordsworth did not have a lot of money at this point in his life. He was quite broke, but he liked the boy liked him. The father liked getting educated from a man like Wordsworth, so it was a good comparable thing, and they all enjoyed each other's company. And then, of course, to the person to whom they are addressed, these words, or these lines, I should say, is his sister. Now, I wanted to talk briefly. This is a short poem. It's a simple poem. And before we went into it, I wanted to talk about an article that a friend of mine wrote, Don Watkins. It's a great article. It's called The Reckoning, Why Serving a Cause Greater Than Yourself Cannot Give Life Meaning. Now, this is, and you can find it on Medium. I'll put a link in the show notes on troubadourmag.com. Or, of course, I might, if I remember, I'll put it in the Facebook comments when I, put this on, or put this video up. Now, what I really like about this is a lot of things, but one thing that's really cool about it is it's about this idea. It starts with this idea of, in our lives, we're going to have a reckoning. And this is very relevant because I think when Wordsworth is writing this poem, the lines written from a small distance from my house, he's having a kind of a reckoning himself. And now what a reckoning is, I mean, besides being the name of a cool movie, John Wick, The Reckoning. I mean, that's a cool name, but there is a kind of an idea that there's going to come a moment when, in our lives, depending on how long you live, when you think, man, this isn't making sense anymore. I don't know why I'm doing this. None of this is helpful for me. Why, what is the point of my life? What is the point of life? Right? These are big questions. Often we think midlife crisis, but I think that's only one reckoning, and we tend to underestimate the number of reckonings. And this blog, or this article, goes into, it quotes other people, it goes into the history of this idea, it goes into the philosophy, it goes into some cool stuff that I think is relevant to read and understand why this reckoning happens to many of us. And I think it is happening to I think it happens to all of us as humans, especially ambitious humans, but it definitely seems to happen more to us nowadays. And one of the causes may be the way in which we are going about pursuing our ambitions today. There may be a fundamental flaw. So you'll have to read the article. But I wanted to read two paragraphs that I thought were great paragraphs, and I think they speak to the poem a little bit of what today that we're talking about. Morality today has largely been emptied of idealism, whereas it once connoted character, virtue, strength, reverence, nobility, the heroic. Today, it is a synonym for nice. We have confused a rocket ship for a paperweight. A moral ideal is not the lifeless, neutered set of rules, prohibitions, and calculations buried inside today's dust-covered ethics textbooks. It is the inspiring and ennobling vision of what is possible to us that we acquire first and foremost through art. And I think he's right that we acquire it through art. I think Wordsworth believed that as well, although in this poem, he's going to argue that we acquire a little bit more of it through nature. So he is a nature poet, and he does believe heavily in art and in the power of art. He's an artist, after all. But he also kind of combats this, and he definitely combats some of his ideas of literature. Now, I want to point out that you don't have to agree with where he says, you can get knowledge from. I don't fully agree in his hypothesis here, and I don't think he does either. I think there's a lot of evidence that he doesn't. What he's going to argue to some degree is that we should put our books down and go out into nature and just have knowledge come to us. And that's one of the projects that he has. And I think there's something to that. And, I think there is something to the idea of leisure. Now, the problem is it can't be, going out into nature by yourself. I mean, he wouldn't, obviously he wouldn't say anything about, you can't learn to read. Although many of the romantics had very bizarre ideas of raising children. Some of them, like Nathaniel Hawthorne, did not allow his children to learn to read until they were like, I think 8 or something like that. And so, they're very old. And part of this is like a view that they should learn in general from the world around them, natural ways, and that books are kind of can be a very unnatural thing. Now, I think they're wrong about that completely. And I think a lot of their own views, they contradict themselves. And this is part of the flaw that the romantics had. But anyway, there is something to what they're saying. And I think it helps to try to get their view and kind of ingest it for yourself and get the positive that you can apply to your own life. I think there's a positive here that is worthwhile. So as Don put it, we've, what are the words that he used? We've confused a rocket ship for a paperweight. And I think there's something about that in terms of how, our contemplative abilities, our abilities to reflect and to think and to see into the nature of things, right? To ask, what is the nature of this thing? Why does it act the way that it does? What is the nature of these groups of things? What is the nature of those people? Why are they acting that way? Right? Why are we able to build these towns in the way that we build them? Why am I able to be the type of person I am? What is the nature of a dog? What is the nature of a bird? What is the nature of the universe? Right? What is the nature of the moon and the sky? And why do I have the relationship that I have to it when I look at the moon? And this is one of the projects we've talked about on this show that Wordsworth had. He wanted to trace the emotional reactions that an individual mind had, particularly his own. And so he was very interested in that. That's not as present in this poem, but it is very important to his project. Now we're going to get to the poem now, but I wanted to kind of just emphasize that idea of the expanding ability of reading great literature like this or great art to, blowing up of your ability to be moral on a better. So it's not just, getting the right morality. It's about an ability to get more. It's almost like a skill set that to be moral and to think in morality in terms of morality, more than just good or bad, but, and Don puts it in his article, but in the development of your character. So one of the things that you should think about when you develop your character is how much time do you leave for leisure? And what is leisure? What is the nature of leisure? Okay, so let's read the poem, and then we will go into the quick little conversation. It's a very short poem, and afterwards we will lost my train of thought. We'll go into a quick comparison. So I have another very short poem to give you an idea of what I think you might be able to get out of this, and then I kind of converse with the verse each stanza. But again, this is a very simple, short poem. Okay, so lines written at a small distance from my house and sent by my little boy to the person to whom they are addressed. It is the first mild day of March, each minute sweeter than before. The redbreast sings from the tall larch that stands beside our door. There is a blessing in the air, which seems a sense of joy to yield to the bare trees and mountains bare, and grass in the green field. My sister, 'tis a wish of mine, now that our morning meal is done, make haste, your morning task resign, come forth and feel the sun. Edward will come with you, and pray, put on with speed your woodland dress, and bring no book, for this one day we'll give to idleness. No joyless forms shall regulate our living calendar. We from today, my friend, will date the opening of the year. Love, now and universal birth, from heart to heart is stealing, from earth to man, from man to earth. It is the hour of feeling. One moment now may give us more than 50 years of reason. Our minds shall drink at every pore the spirit of the season. Some silent laws our hearts may make, which they shall long obey. We for the year to come may take our temper from today. And from the blessed power that rolls about, below, above, we'll frame the measure of our souls. They shall be tuned to love. Then come, my sister, I come, I pray, with speed put on your woodland dress, and bring no book, for this one day will give to idleness. Okay, a short poem, as I said. And I want to, like I said, we're going to go through it a little bit. And I want to emphasize that there are things that, I don't quite agree with. And that's okay. I think with great art, and this I believe is a great poem. It has a very simple purpose behind it. It has an ABCB, a simple little traditional ballad form. So if you listen to Ballad Wednesdays, you'll hear the same kind of cadence that you heard here. It is the first mild day of March, each minute sweeter than before. The redbreast sings from the tall larch that stands beside our door. So there's a cadence to it. It has a pleasantness in the way that it rolls. There's also a rhyme: march, larch, before, door, air, bear, yield, field, so on and so forth. So you're getting a rhyme scheme. You're getting traditional ballad, but he's doing something a little different. He's just commenting on a scene, on a moment in his life, and this is a real moment. Right, this could easily be written in prose. He could talk about this. It could be a journal entry, right? And he's talking about this mild day, but he turned it into this poem, and he's trying to reach something a little more universal. So what's going on? Whenever you approach a poem, I always recommend thinking about who it's written for, why it's written, but especially who's speaking and who's it written for. So he took a long time to talk about that these are lines. The poem's name is even Lines. The lines are written at a small distance from my house. So he is writing these lines, the narrator, from a small distance. You can probably see his house. He sends it with his little boy to the person to whom they are addressed, supposedly his sister, since he says my sister at some point. Now, what do the lines say? The lines say, it is the first mild day of March, right? So we're starting to enter into this kind of beginning of spring. He's starting it off in this very traditional romantic sense of talking about nature. Mild day of March, mild March, right? It is the first mild day of March, each minute sweeter than before, which is a kind of an interesting way of looking at early spring. So early spring, I'm in summer, and when I was in Texas, Texas was like each minute more like hell than the minute before. Like it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. If you start at like 7 in the morning, it's bad. If in the summertime, you go outside. And then at 8:01, it's a little bit worse. 8:02 is a little bit worse. 8:03, it's like, oh my gosh, shoot me. But if you're in a nice place, he's in the Lake District in England, which I've never been, but I'm going to take his word for it. But I'm in California. In the beginning of March, you start at like 7 a.m. It seems, I'm in the Bay Area, by the way. So it's, and not right on the Bay in San Francisco. I'm a little bit inland. So, it's not quite as cold. And I think it's perfect weather. And it does seem at this time in March that each minute makes it sweeter than before, all the way through in the nighttime. So it starts off cool and brisk and a little bit, maybe too cold at first. And then every minute just a teeny bit better. And then at its highest heat, it's still really low and it's amazing and feels great. And then it, still goes down. So there is something, he's telling you a lot if you stop to think about what this is like in real life. And he's describing a lot of stuff. The red-breast bird sings from the tall larch, a tree that stands beside our door. So he's looking at the scene. He sees like, oh, there's a tree that's beside our door, and there's a redbreast that sings from it. And I could see it. And he's writing these words, and he's telling it to his sister. Hey, look at these things out in nature. Like you're inside, right? There is a blessing in the air, which seems a sense of joy to yield. Which seems a sense of joy to yield. So there's a joy in the air that he wants you to make sure that she is going to experience. To the bare trees and mountains bare, B-A-R-E, and grass in the green field. So this is part of the sense of joy. To the bare fields, or excuse me, trees and mountains bare. So I think he's getting this. He's trying to convey this idea of what he is experiencing and sitting away from the house, in a sense in nature, and he's looking on civilization or the creation of man, and he's outside of that, and he's looking on the little creation that they have, and he's saying like, look outside of where you are. There's joy to be had. My sister, 'tis a wish of mine, now that our morning meal is done, make haste, your morning task resign, come forth and feel the sun. Now there's an interesting feel where idleness is, he wants to hurry up and be idle, right? Which is an interesting kind of contradiction almost, or paradox, where it's, you want to hurry up to be lazy. You want to do things really quickly so that you can go out and just be, do nothing. And now obviously there's a common sensical way of looking at it, which is you want more time out in the sun. Great. You want more time out in the sun. I love it. But, there isn't, when it's in poetry, he's trying to stress something, I think, so the lines call to his sister, 'tis a wish of mine, now that our morning meal is done. So they have their food. He wants her to hurry up, make haste, your morning task resign. So give up your morning task, give up whatever daily routines that you have. You have some journaling to do, you have some housework, you have to clean behind the oven, you have to get the soot out of the chimney. I mean, whatever it is, you have these things that you have to do, right? You have to put your finances in order. These are, mundane, important tasks, but they're, tasks that aren't something that the redbreast does, right? The bird doesn't do that. Come forth and feel the sun. That's what the bird does. Edward will come with you and pray. Put on with speed your woodland dress. Again, he's emphasizing the speed thing, right? So hurry up, make haste, hurry up, which is kind of a like I said, a paradox that is at the heart of this whole thing about giving up civilization to be out in nature and to hurry up and do it. And in a sense that you can't do that. Like his whole project, I think, is kind of impossible in terms of he has this paradoxical pursuit of idleness. And so he asked her to, again, a morning task, resign that, Put on with speed your woodland dress. And there is a sense of urgency in this appeal that may paradoxically contradict the goal itself, right? The goal of being idle. However, the speaker craves it as he wants an escape from the joyless forms that regulate our living calendar. That's a quote in a few minutes or in a few seconds. And what he wants is an escape from time itself, a reversion to nature in the form of a retreat into the woods, even if only for a day. Okay. So, put on your woodland dress and bring no book. So when you come out here, don't bring a book for this one day, and we'll give in to idleness. We'll give to idleness. No joyless forms shall regulate. So this is the comparison. So there's joy, right? So you have to look at what he's saying here. He's saying there is a blessing in the air, which seems a sense of joy to yield. What's the joy? It's all this stuff he's talking about, where the mid mild day of March, minute sweet, it's outdoors. The redbreast sings by the tall tree, tall larch. It's a blessing. There's a sense of joy. The bare mountains. So you have trees that are still, winter has just finished and they haven't grown their leaves back. The mountains have just been, maybe the ice has been melting off, or the snow has been melting off the mountains. And, the grass is green, and grass on the green field. And then he says, no joyless form shall regulate our living calendar. We from today, my friend, will date the opening of the year. So, this is the first day of the year, and it's, in a sense, it's not going to be a calendar made by humans, although calendars made by humans, remember, are a reflection of reality or nature. And that's kind of, I think, a point that he's trying to make here. But there's a joylessness that happens in his view with these kind of creations. And I think there is some relevant point to that occasionally. I think he may go too far sometimes, but there's something. Now, and here's an interesting thing about what's happening in his life at this moment, and why I think this poem is important, and why I think he's kind of going through a reckoning. So this is why this poem, I think, is very paradoxical in a lot of ways. I think he's going through a reckoning. So right now in his life, and I'm reading a couple biographies about him. I just read one, a short one. I'm reading a bigger one. And he's going through his first real attempts to write The Recluse. Now, if you followed along with what this series on Wordsworth that I've been doing for Sunday Morning Poetry, I've talked about this several times. But I'll real quickly, he writes the prelude, he writes lyrical ballads, he writes other poems in 1802, and he writes lots of poetry. The Borders is a great play that he wrote. And there's The Excursion, which is very famous and very successful in his own time. And then he writes the prelude in 1805, or finishes it, but never publishes it. And he works on it until his death. And then basically, when you buy the prelude, you'll probably buy a book that has two versions in it. So there's an 1805 version, an 1850 version. Usually they're side by side. So it's one page, 1805, 1850, just so you can kind of get a comparison, because there is no official version of this. Like, he read it to friends and they loved it. They thought it was genius. The prelude is a prelude. It's a before something, which is the Recluse. And the Recluse was going to be his Homeric epic. It's going to be his Virgilian, it's going to be like the Aenead for him, or in his parlance, Milton's Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. Milton is one of his favorites. And he doesn't accomplish this in his life. He writes very small parts of it, but he doesn't come close to the kind of epic project he wanted. And one of the main reasons, I think, and I'm not the only one who thinks this, but one issue he has is he has been influenced by Coleridge a lot. And I don't want to put Coleridge under the bus here. I mean, I think Wordsworth has his own hand in this. But they had this kind of idea that that he, particularly Wordsworth, was going to write an all-consuming, all-knowledge book, like the book. It was going to replace, how people used to have just the Iliad and the Odyssey in Homeric times or after Homer in Athens. Like, that would be the canon. In medieval Europe, the Bible was the canon that represented all knowledge. This was supposedly going to represent all knowledge, the Recluse. And so it was going to, you couldn't even imagine doing this today at all. Like, this would be such a ridiculous thing. There are 1 million books written every year now. I mean, like, there's so many things. But this, even in 1798 in the early 1800s, there's just so much stuff to read. So he was, and he had to try. He went to Germany to try to learn German, because he needed to get all the German metaphysics and all the German plays. He had to, and then of course the same thing with Italy. So he wanted to have like this one consuming book that consumed and taught and had every bit of knowledge kind of consumed at least in some fashion in it. Something on zoology and on metaphysics and on art, on nature, on the redbreast, whatever it is, all in a poetic meter in an epic story. I mean, that's a hell of a thing to ask somebody to do. And I think at this point, he's getting a little bit tired already of the intense regiment of learning and book reading he has to do. So some of this is a little bit of, I think, a reckoning. Like, it's starting to become clear that this may never quite happen. Now, I will say that in his attempt to achieve this great ambitious work, he does write what many consider the greatest romantic poem, epic poem of the 19th century, maybe even of the Romantic movement, which is the Prelude. And the Prelude is, which again was not published, but it was written a couple times or endlessly during his lifetime. It was written, and the theme is the growth of the poet's mind. He focuses on himself. It's an autobiography in a sense. And it's a story of him growing as a person, but it focuses on the growth of the mind. And again, the thing we've talked about on the show a lot is his tracing moments in people, in psychological moments, tracing excitements and passions is what I should say, in psychological moments. So that, I think, is what's going on in this poem, where there's joyless forms, there's putting down the books. That is the life of this learning and this all these books that I have to read. And it's, and it did not at this point, like I think this is 1798 still when this happened, 1799. At this point, he's still, getting started with reading and getting into the Recluse a little bit more. And he's fighting it. He keeps wanting to just go out into nature. Wordsworth is known as one of the great walkers of all time. So you'd think, if you know anything about Steve Jobs used to walk around. He would even have meetings walking around. He would think a lot walking. Bill Gates does this as well. But I don't think any of them hold a candlestick to Wordsworth, who would, climb mountains. He would go on huge, long walking tours for days and days. I mean, and this is where he would gather a lot of things. And in fact, I'm kind of getting on a tangent, but I'll just say this, that his sister had a lot to do with his success, because many of his poems he composed while walking verbally, and she wrote them down for him. And then, of course, he would go back and kind of talk about it, but not all of his poems, but there were some times when he would compose verbally, and he would just kind of get the sounds out as he was walking around. And that's what he wanted to do. That's kind of the natural thing for Wordsworth. And, but he was trying to fight this to, one, write this great epic because he wanted to do it, and two, because he loved Coleridge and wanted to please Coleridge, I think. So he's but he's torn, and there's a kind of a reckoning going on, and there's no joyless forms shall regulate our living calendar. We from today, my friend, will date the opening of the year. It's a new year. We're going to start over. And now he's, we're getting into something, one of his views, love. This is one of his big ideas in this thing. Love, which I think is kind of a cliche, but love, now and universal birth, from heart to heart is stealing, from earth, nature to man, from man to earth. It is the hour of feeling. Now there is this sounds really nice. Listen to it again. Love, now and universal birth, from heart to heart is stealing, from earth to man, from man to earth. It is the hour of feeling. Now, I think he's trying to say something about, the universal power of love, essentially. So, in this piece, love is the universal feeling that connects man to nature, to other men, and to himself, connecting him to himself. And then, of course, pulling him out of his man-made house and his man-made knowledge to a more primal, expansive space. There is a big emphasis, of course, on feeling. Now, when we think, if you've read anything about the Romantics, you know that emotion, that they put emotion over reason. At least that's the thought. And I think it's more than that. I think it's more passion and imagination. And they had a certain view of passion and imagination as critical versus the old school, pure mathematical rationalism that they were rebelling against. But I think part of that is because they didn't agree, and neither do I, that rationality is this purely mathematical thing. But in this poem, we're really getting a sense of the feeling, the emotion part of it, right? There's the parallelism of the line from earth to man, from man to earth. And that signifies the reciprocal relationship of humankind with the natural world, and the feelings that connect is the kind of connective tissue between those two. And Wordsworth is, again, emphasizing his escape from what you can call temporality, right? This is what, in society, this is what the world of studying, essentially, for the recluse, is one way to look at it, or studying in general. When he rushes us through to the last line, from heart to heart, from earth to man to earth. And it's a powerful line in the stanza, and because he uses this M dash. So it makes it a proclamation. It is the hour of feeling. So remember, this is a poem written to his sister. If she will heed him and the call, so he's calling to her, hey sis, come over here. But he's doing it through the medium of this little boy. Maybe you could think of it as a Cupid or some kind of, if you want to put it into somewhat of mythological terms, it could be some kind of messenger god who goes out and sends and tries to get the great sister to come to him. And he's obeying the call of nature to be out in nature rather than in the time of the books that he's reading. And if she obeys that call, they will be able to slip away from their human constructions and give themselves completely to idleness. And the idleness becomes the refrain, the repetition that comes at the closing line too. And through the speaker, the speaker recognizes that this escape cannot be permanent and therefore it's incomplete. But he regulates himself to giving this one day on which feeling may still be experienced fully. And I think that's the critical thing here is that he experiences it and wants to experience it fully, even if it's just one day. One moment now may give us more than 50 years of reason. Our minds shall drink at every pore the spirit of the season. Now this, I think, is an edict. It's a proclamation. It's an idea that if you go one moment in nature, it will give you more than 50 years of reason. This is kind of the rebel at work, because when he says reason, I think he's meaning more the kind of rationalism, the kind of pure everything's geometry or mathematics, or we have to have this very rigid logical structure to everything, and there's no emotion, there's no room for emotion in this kind of thing. And I think he's kind of rebelling against that. And again, I think it's a moment of frustration also, because he doesn't, in other places, when he talks about imagination, he and Wordsworth, they talk about imagination as a new form of reasoning, in a sense, that imagination is putting together things that are alike and dislike in the world in a new way, right? It's imagining something brand new, but you're putting pearly and white and gate, these three different ideas, into one thing, and it's pearly white gates, right? That's imagination. But this can also be an imagination of, understanding how the relationship between an apple falling and an asteroid, right? That's also using your imagination. It's a certain kind of way to use your imagination, but it's imagination. Or telling a story, right, is your imagination, but you're using your observational faculty first to look out on the world, and then from there you build your own imagination rather than, oh, here's what other people said, so we have to build off of that, and that's the only way. We unquestioningly have to build off of what other people said. I think that's what he's really rebelling against. Some silent laws our hearts may make, which they shall long obey. We for the year to come may take our temper from today. So some silent laws our hearts may make, which they shall long obey. So if we go out in this world, I think he's saying something that there's a kind of silent law that they can obey. That's kind of the obeying the call that he's having of nature, right? It's like, here's this law of nature that we're going to obey. And we, for the year, this whole rest of the year to come, may take our temper from today. So this is where I think he's getting at, that you can't have idleness every day. But if you have it one day and you do it right, and you have it maybe occasionally and you do it right, it'll be enough. It'll be enough to put you through the year. It'll be enough to give you, a kind of resonance to fuel to go through the rest of the year. And from the blessed power that rolls about. So again, when you go out into nature and you're idle, you put down your books and you're just idle and you just walk around in nature, you're going to get a blessed power. It's going to roll, right? I like the way that sounds. And from the blessed power that rolls about, below, above, we'll frame the measure of our souls. We'll frame, right? So if you think about the soul and what he's trying to do with the, going out into nature, and he does this in other poems, in the development of the soul, the raising of kids, but also, the raising of yourself, the understanding of yourself comes from nature, and that, and they shall be tuned to love. And that's, they didn't have a radio. So tune, he must be talking about musical tuning, like tuning your instrument to the right sounds. And that's what he's trying to get at with the poem is, how do you build and get into that tuning in the right way to get your soul vibrating in relation to nature in the proper manner? Then come, my sister, I come. I pray, with speed put on your woodland dress, and bring no book, for this one day will give to idleness. Now I wanted to point out that leisure, which is the title of the next poem, if you haven't seen it, if you're on Facebook, leisure is where we get the word school from. It comes from the Greek schola. And in a sense, school is supposedly the place, or had been the place, and this is the way it was for the Greeks, where it was considered the leisure place. And by leisure, they didn't mean sitting back and watching TV, but they meant a very heavy, active kind of thoughtfulness. To be leisurely is, again, not to just sit back and do nothing, but it's rather to look at art and contemplate, or look at nature and contemplate. It's to be when you look, let me put it this way. When you look at somebody just sitting down by the pool reading something, it doesn't look like anything's happening. But in fact, their mind, if we could put like a diagram, if we could plot out all the neurons that are firing and all the machine work that's going on, it would be, like a huge engine room that's just moving and pounding and going and going and going. But they're just sitting there. They're just being quiet. They're not saying anything. They're not turning a wrench. They're not typing on a computer. They're not talking to a phone. They're not designing anything. They're not building anything. They're not creating anything. They're just reading. And yet there's something very profound going on within that person. And that is what leisure is. And that's what school is supposed to have been. Although it didn't really happen that way. I think it changed from that. So the place where we educate and teach is derived from a word which means leisure. School does not, properly speaking, mean school, but leisure. So school doesn't really mean school. It means leisure, and that's the place where we do this kind of leisure. And I think that's what he means by idleness, right? Because when you look at someone who's contemplating nature, if you think about the cliche poet, he's just kind of laying there, right? Just looking up at stuff, the shirt half open. Like, oh. So let me read this quick little poem by W.H. Davies called Leisure. It's very simple. It's not nearly as powerful or as good as Wordsworth, but it's interesting to have the kind of contrast. What is this life if, full of care, we have no time to stand and stare? No time to stand beneath the boughs and stare as long as sheep and cows. No time to see when woods we pass, where squirrels hide their nuts in grass. No time to see in broad daylight, streams full of stars like skies at night. No time to turn at beauty's glance and watch her feet, how they can dance. No time to wait till her mouth can enrich that smile her eyes began. A poor life this if, full of care, we have no time to stand and stare. One of the things that I argue is that we don't always need art to be personal. We don't always need it to be built into something that's obviously at the beginning practical. What we do need is to understand that beauty is a value to be pursued in and of itself. That beauty is part of what makes human life worth living. That there is something important about enjoying and being able to enjoy great beauty. And in literature, there's a lot of great beauty available. This poem by Wordsworth, I think, is quite beautiful, harmonious, and harmonious in a way that is deep. Sublime is a word that we don't use anymore, which means a kind of profound, reverential, awe-filled art or thing that brings about that emotion. It's an emotional feeling of something sublime, something that brings about the sublime. We say that is sublime. And it's awe-inspiring. It inspires this sense of something greater, but not necessarily. So it doesn't always have to be greater than yourself. It could be greater in yourself, something worth achieving because of this. And I think this poem by Wordsworth of going out into nature and just being idle is worthwhile. To not bring a podcast, to not bring your phone, maybe bring a good friend and just go out into the woods and walk and talk. I think that if that's all you get from this poem, that's great. If you haven't done that very often, I really recommend it. Even if I recommend just going on walks without headphones and music, just by yourself once in a while and just think. Just don't even write. Don't even think about, I have to journal this or the time is wasted. None of that. Just take your body and just go. Right? Find a place you can go and just go and then contemplate, think about things. I haven't done this as much as I used to, but I used to go on these, Sunday afternoon think-a-thons when I lived in Southern California. There's this little trail by my house. And I think it was a very interesting time for me in terms of creative output. I put out a lot of stuff. And now that I'm saying this, and it's I don't know why I don't walk as much as I used to. I walk, but not as much as I used to. So it's probably something I should do more of, now that I think about it. So if this just inspires you to do a little walking out in nature, boom, I think that's all groovy. Okay, thank you guys for your time. I hope you enjoyed lines written at a small distance from my house and sent by my little boy to the person to whom they are addressed. And I hope they are addressed now to you.